Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the fifth edition of the JCOT AJOR scientific writing program. Unfortunately, this time it's online, but let me just start off proceedings by talking about my topic, which is that of publication metrics. So, metrics has evolved over time. Metrics basically means measurement, measuring, right? Evolved from measuring data regarding books, which is librametrics, which is in books, or books in general, which is bibliometrics, to scientific books and literature, which is scientometrics, to infometrics, to webometrics using the web, and finally we have reached this age of altmetrics, and I'll come to that when I talk about it. But what I'm going to be talking about today is basically these things. What is the definition of publication metrics? What are the uses? What are the sources? What are the different types? Article level, author level, journal level, the criticisms and distortions with the current way of checking metrics, what are fake, what are bogus metrics, and when there's been a call for change, what are alt metrics, and I'll then summarize what I just spoke about. So publication metrics can be defined really as the application of mathematical statistical methods to evaluate the impact of books and other media of communication on society, on the scientific community at large. In effect, what we're doing is we're using some quantitative measure to assess the output of our research, whether it's publications or whether it's citations, and use that data to understand how well it's being used and utilized. So basically these things. What is have heard of our citation index or H index or the impact factor of journals, and I'm going to touch about each of them. So the uses really is to assess the influence of this published research. How really effective is your research? Also, you can use it to rank journals, to rank different authors, different scientific organizations according to their journals, to assist the identifying of institutions and individuals for research funding, for grant applications, for growth opportunities, for promotions. In formulating new science policies, you need to take care of what the metrics are of that time. In identifying the core periodicals in a particular field of study, if you're looking at, say, a specific field of study, or identifying research trends and growth of knowledge. Therefore, if authors want to use these metrics, it's basically to make an informed decision as to which journal you want to send your article to be published to. And of course, the journals do it so that they can attract editors, sponsors, authors, readers, and therefore have collaborative research participation. The sources really are many. It's usually on the web now. The Web of Science or Clarivate is a pretty good source. You also have Scopus and Elsevier, which is similar to that of Web of Science. You have Dimensions, which is a new form of source for the publication metrics. You also have Google Scholar, which you all have heard of on Google. And of course, there's Altmetrics, which is using a lot of other data, the Twitter data, download data, blog data, and the blog post data, media data. And of course, you have individual identifier tools like the ORCID tool or the ResearchGate, which are networking sites for measuring metrics. So you have different types of metrics. There's article level metrics, and I mentioned citation count is one of them. You also have field weighted citation index, and you have faculty opinions which are used in the past, but now most of them are shifting towards altmetrics. And you have author level metrics, which is the H index, which is used most commonly. Then you have the Einstein research profile and also citation reports. And then the journal level metrics, which is really the journal, how good is it being sort of assessed in terms of the people who want to read it or who want to send their journal, their article to. So you have impact factors, and you have fire impact factors and eigenfactors and other such factors I'm going to talk about. So first, let's start off with the article level metrics. The article level metrics, really, the most common one is the citation count, and you also have something called the field weight citation impact. And of course, now we are relying more and more on alternate metrics, which are altmetrics, which are taking into account social media. The sources include the journal citation report, which you can get online, and then the Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar, Sicences, and Psychinfo, which are all different websites where you can look for article level metrics and citation count. The citation count is really how many times that particular article has been cited, or how many times you actually use it as a reference to your article. So understand the difference between citation and reference. I've put one article here which says paper R really has a reference to paper C, whereas C actually has a citation from R. So that's how you understand what a citation is and what a reference is. Then, of course, there's author level metrics, which are the Hirsch index or the H index, which is the number of times the papers have been published, each of which have been cited at least that many number of times. So if you have, say, a researcher like Dr. Vesh, who is a pretty prolific researcher and publisher and author, you will have his H index, which states that he has published H papers, and each of them have been cited at least H times. So this is a way of checking how productive and how much impact these authors have on the rest of the scientific community through their publishing work. And you can get this on different websites. Again, Web of Science is one of the most commonly used. Otherwise, you have Scopus and Google Scholar. Google Scholar metrics usually takes into account their 5-year H index. So that's called the H5 index. So in the last 5 complete years, the articles published, the largest number which has been cited at least the same number of times as stated. Because H index uses the last 2 years. So I'll just script. This is a different way of looking at the H index through different websites for different authors. And then, of course, there's journal level metrics. And journal level metrics, the most commonly used metric is the impact factor, again using the Web of Science or the journal citation report data. Unfortunately, that needs subscription. And you have CiteScore and the Scimago Journal Index Indicator SGR, which is a weighted score which is free on the web. So these basically tell you how important or how much the particular journal is considered important in scientific community according to their impact and their influence. They are ranked. The quality is then indirectly measured. And apart from that, you have the most common used index for measuring journal level metrics is the impact factor. So say, for example, the number of times the articles have been published in 2019 and 2020, 2 years, cited by index journals during 2021. And the total number of citable items that are published in those 2 years was B. The impact factor would be A by B. Just to give an example, the JCOT, for example, had, say, 300 citations this year for articles published in the last 2 years. And the total number of articles that are published in the last 2 years was, say, 120, which is, of course, just an example. The impact factor is 2.5 because it is 300 divided by 120. So the impact factor is the number of times an article which is published in the last 2 years was cited in that year. But that is just one way of measuring. You also have a 5-year journal impact factor, which is taking into account the last 5 years, which is better because many times articles are published and they don't get cited very soon. They're cited over time over the next few years. There's also something called a journal immediacy index, which is the number of times an article published in the current year is cited within the same year. So it's something which is like hot. Like, for example, you'll have a lot of articles on the coronavirus, which will be citing other articles on coronavirus, again, all of this year. The Eigenfactor is sort of a weighted citation index, which basically measures the number of times an article in the last 5 years was cited in that year, with citations from more influential or more important journals being weighted more than citations from less influential journals. So you have a lot of metrics, and this can also be through Scopus measure journal and country rank of a particular journal. So this is a Scimago journal ranking, which is the weighted citations in that year to papers published in the last 3 years, and that gives an sort of ranking of that journal in the whole year. You also have something called the source normalized impact per paper, which is the ratio of the source average citation count per paper and the citation potential of that particular subject field, because many times you have different subject fields which are more discussed and more cited. For example, basic sciences are more cited in most scientific journals by authors writing on various topics. Unfortunately, there's a big obsession about this impact factor. In the beginning, the journal impact factor was very important for journals. Then they had a declaration. I'm going to talk about that. And there were a lot of people misusing the impact factor to push up their own journal importance and to get sort of more senior authors to write, or more influential authors who had many more scientific articles to their credit to publish in their journals. And then what happens is it was distorted because people would cite them. So there were a lot of criticisms and distortions to this impact factor. Unfortunately, we all understand that journal metrics actually can never be used to evaluate an individual article impact, because you may find that one particular article in a journal may be cited 1,000 times, but the rest of the articles in that journal are not. So that sort of distorts the journal impact factor. Also, the scientific field that the journal itself belongs to influences the impact factor. If it is something to do with the Sicences, as I mentioned earlier, it has got more citations and therefore increases the impact factors. Articles from the journal like Nature or sort of basic sciences journals usually have a higher impact factor, and simply because they have to be cited by other researchers as well. And of course, there have been problems with self citations and groups of authors who cite each other and honorary authorship, which all sort of distort the actual impact and the actual citation index of articles, or the H index of authors and the impact factors of journals. And therefore, another problem, of course, is the review article sort of being published in certain journals, and they will obviously be cited more. So what happens is, and apart from the 2-year frames, which are sometimes too low, so that's why you have 5-year sort of 5-year time frames required. Another problem is that they are biased towards English language reporting journals. And unfortunately, if you ask these impact factor calculating sites like the Web of Science or Scopus, they are not able to show you the data source, and they cannot reproduce their impact factor easily to the public. So there have been a lot of criticisms to these metrics. In addition, there were many bogus or fake metrics which came out, like the scientific journal impact factor, or the Cosmos impact factor, or the global impact factor, and others which you can see here, which were basically asking for upfront payment for your metrics. And we had no clue whether they used a mathematical formula or whether they evaluated, and what was the data source. And the company also was sort of iffy. So therefore, there was a lot of sort of antagonism to these different journal metrics, which are used as the publication metrics. And the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, the DORA, was conceived in the annual meeting of the American Society for Cell Biology in 2012. And they announced that the world scientific community needs to eliminate the role of this journal impact factor in evaluating research for funding, hiring, promotions, or institutional effectiveness, because it's very skewed, and it skews towards more senior journals, or senior authors, and senior or older organizations and journals. So a lot of people, more than almost 12,000 individual signatories and 460 organizations actually signed in, and even big ones, and they all said that we need to change it and no longer use just the original publication metrics. Similarly, the Leiden Manifesto was published in Nature in 2015 by Diana Hicks and Paul Wouters, and they spoke about offering better review, and they also said that we need to change. And then came what we now use, what is called Altmetrics. Altmetrics, by definition, really is a set of newer alternative methods which are based on social media or the web to track, measure, analyze the research impact of articles, of authors, and of journals. And you want to see who's really actually reading or citing or talking about you, and that's real-time usage. This would depend upon not just what came out in scientific literature or in high-impact journals, but also how many times that the page was viewed online, how many downloads were taken from for your article or for your author site, the blog post mentioning your article, the comments, shares, likes in Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms, and the interest that people had in their web search by sort of bookmarking that page or saving or subscribing. And these all would actually get together. And again, it seems very complicated, but there are different platforms that can actually assess this and track this. So you have something called altmetric.com, which is used by Digital Sciences, Spring, and Nature. You also have Impact Story, you have Plum Analytics by Elsevier. And again, many individual journals and publishers use these altmetrics, and they actually sort of calculate their altmetrics on the basis of how many times the article, for example, or the author has been cited or seen or even page viewed or mentioned in Twitter or linked to their web page and stuff. So a lot of these altmetrics are now available, and they also use different repositories. Now, repositories really help because many times you may not have the whole article, but you may have just presentation being shared in the university or the library being open, and that has been utilized and seen by people who want to access your data or your presentation or your publication, either through entire figures or just through slides. And they all help in sort of giving you an idea of your importance in real time usage. So you have different ways of presenting this depending on which site you use. You use the Web of Science, or you use Scopus, or you use Mendeley, or you use individual like PLOS, individual journal data. You can actually own for an article for your own self as an author as well. So to take home, what I want most of us to understand is that publication metrics are just one tool that can be used to judge the quality of a journal or a paper or an individual, but they are not the only way. And biases should be considered, especially when there is good evidence that some metrics will be biased. So we need to use metrics that are supported by reliable data, and it's better to use a basket of publication metrics than one itself. And if you know how the metric works, that's the best way. Otherwise, if you don't know how it works, then please don't use it. Similarly, it's not very nice to say that one journal is better than the other only because of the metrics, and you have no idea why. So we need clarity about this, how you judge quality. And for authors, it pays to keep your publication metrics up to date, to understand which metrics may be used best to your advantage, because your metrics are going to be utilized by journals to accept your publication, to accept your presentation, to organizations to accept your job positions, and try to think of alternative ways. Remember, putting up your article on Facebook or on Twitter or on social media, WhatsApp is all useful in increasing your Altmetrics. And therefore, we need to understand that this is one global way of assessing your research and publication data responsibly. A lot of other sites can be sort of accessed by the different people who are watching this, to understand that this all is where you need to read to understand how each thing's help. What questions I had by the end of my presentation, which I had to read for, of course, was that as a researcher, are these metric providers actually delivering the services that we need? Are they actually providing true real-time metrics? Are they open and transparent about how their metrics are calculated? And why do we have to judge a paper differently just because of the journal being a very good one, which we have sort of given a high impact factor? And is there any other way to access it? So I'll leave this for you to think about, and then maybe take questions from you later on. Thank you. I hope you had fun listening to this lecture. Bye.